This is Lisa Lee, tarot reader, philosopher, and aspiring writer with Natasha, astrologer extraordinaire, for the first ever episode of the New Virginity podcast. Today starts a series where we will be discussing the astro charts of the men and women behind the great men. And by great men, I mean, by way of investigation, mostly a-holes. I'm afraid so. So one of the first things I want to say, and hey, Natasha, let's introduce you. How are you feeling today?
Hey, Lise. I'm good. So excited for our first podcast.
We're going to have so much fun with this today. The amount of like tea and the receipts that I've got in front of me, like, and the charts, I cannot believe how much drama we've got going on here. Before we even get started though, I want to just first kind of like set the tone by explaining why we chose the name New Virginity. I think it was like 2020 when we started throwing that around because we had like looked up the original meaning of virgin. And I was Googling the meaning, like the actual definition, because I couldn't remember like where we got this from. And there was an article in 2021 by Kristen Shields, and she has the meaning of virgin morphed. We should reclaim the original intent. So we weren't the only one with that idea. So the word virgin was derived from a Greek word that meant not attached to a man, a woman who is one in herself. Goddesses like Ishtar, Diana, actually even Athena too, I think, and Isis were called virgins not because they were inexperienced with passion, but because they were strong and independent. And that's basically word for word from this article that Kristen Shields wrote. Further evidence of the term virginal, originally meaning strong, comes from another Greek word, Parthenos. The root also builds the Latin word parthenogenesis, which, if you remember your biology, means self-fertilizing. Isn't that cool? Virgin birth.
I know, I love that word.
New virginity, lady.
New virginity!
Woo! So let's start by talking about the people that we picked. I picked Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. Does she have a middle name? Coretta Scott. Yeah, that's it. And we also have Einstein and Einstein's wife, Mileva. How do you say the last name again? I'm so bad.
Mileva Marich.
Mileva Marich, and Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald, as well as FDR and Eleanor. I have no idea how long this is going to take us, but we might go for like 5 hours. The way that I'm looking at it, we might go for a really long time. So let's kind of just get into our stride a little bit. I found some really crazy stuff with the Martin Luther King investigation that I did, the little research bit that I have here. But I don't really want to start by focusing on him or any of the stuff I found. I kind of want to start by focusing on her. I found this article in the New York Times where it opens where she kind of said something about like he didn't remember her birthday. Martin Luther King Jr. forgot Coretta's birthday in 1965, but she said she didn't mind. In light of my own involvement and commitment, she said, it's not too difficult for me to understand and forgive little things like this, which do occur sometimes. Red flag.
Oh my God. What's so interesting though is she has Sun conjunct Chiron in the 8th house in Taurus. And that's like, it's your ego is always wounded and you're healing from that. So constantly, like by her very nature, he would have forgotten her birthday, like, of course, because that's a Sun conjunct Chiron episode, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is so interesting because, like, she's an Antioch alum. We are Antioch alums, and that's like an incredibly like revolutionary school. Like, it's like almost ridiculously so, especially back then. It was like subversively revolutionary. And I don't know. Do we need a background on Antioch? Probably not.
Unless they're paying you to advertise.
Nah, not gonna do it. I mean, listen, Antioch's a great place, but I think it's important to like really see the fact that she was radical, probably before, maybe not before him, but like right alongside him. On their first date, they were talking about the merits of capitalism versus communism, which is like doesn't that sound like a good date? I was like,
so good.
And
so it shows too, like that's everything you're saying is like confirmed in her chart 100%. and if I go to the chart too quickly, stop me.
Mm-hmm.
But like on her midheaven, she's a Cancer midheaven, so she's seen as really caring, but it's exactly conjunct Mars. So that's like where her force and energy goes out, like publicly with Pluto. So it's like a very transformative, super powerful caring. And it's trine a moon conjunct Jupiter in Pisces in the 6th house. So like she has like a huge amount of like Piscean emotion where she feels comfortable, but it's in the 6th house of service. So she's born to serve transformatively, publicly.
She definitely does. I mean, I'm going to quote this article from the Times. King was attracted to Coretta in no small part because of her experience as an activist exceeded his own. So her experience as an activist exceeded his own. 13 years later, however, she expressed frustration with her limited role in the civil rights movement. In quotes, "My husband feels it important that one parent remain at home to give them, the children, security." She told the reporter in Seattle, "But I would like to make a more complete witness by marching and, if necessary, going to jail." Martin, on the other hand, never spent time alone with the children when Coretta traveled. Instead, the Kings relied on friends and family to watch Yolanda, Martin, Dexter, and Bernice. In a memoir written years later, Coretta recalled a conversation in which she told Martin she wanted to make a more active role in the movement. During one exchange, he told me, "You see, I'm called by God, and you aren't." I responded, "I've always felt that I have a call on my life, too. I've been called by God, too, to do something." Still not convinced, Martin turned to me and said, "Well, somebody has to take care of the kids." "No problem," she said. "She'll do it." So that's a quote from the Time article, and I'll link the articles in whatever information box we.
Oh, that was hard for her. She's like, her chart looks like depressed, is what I see, because she's deeply emotional, and like something is imbalanced. But she's a Libra rising, so she would make harmony, she would make peace, and make it work.
She had that kind of a Rock of Gibraltar kind of stance with him. Although there is like mention that he was sort of like in one of these articles, like, you know, the way that he spoke to her, I think it may be even the end of this one. Yeah. So at Antioch College,
he was attracted to that though, because she has Aries in the 7th house with Mercury and Uranus though, so she was attracted to like an incredibly fiery mind and someone who was like almost unpredictable, with like so much energy and so much strength, like a warrior. Like that's the partner she wanted.
Yeah. Well, you know, there has there's a quote here. "While my husband was being prepared for the job that he was doing, I feel that I was being prepared also to be a helpmate. I feel very strongly that I was meant to be this way." So there is kind of like a destined quality to the way that, like, and you know, this is also a sign of the times. I want to read you this little blurb over here about Antioch. At Antioch College, as she recalled in the article, she had insisted on doing her student teaching in Yellow Springs public schools, along with her white classmates. But the Yellow Springs schools were segregated, and Antioch officials wanted her to travel 9 miles to an integrated school in Xenia, Ohio. She felt like crying when her teachers and classmates refused to support her. "Then I thought, I'm a Negro and I'm going to be a Negro for the rest of my life. I just can't let this kind of thing get me down. I'll have to accept this." So I made a compromise. So like she had such passion. She wanted to do so much. And it's almost like her life, and I don't know if the chart bears it out like this, but it's almost like there's this aspect of her life that was, you know, pushing really hard for the things that she cared about, and then like time and time again being thwarted by these like external circumstances where she could get only so far with her ambition, and then she was kind of like put back in the box, or like get back in your place. Even like before she met Martin, like it seems to be like a part of the soul contract theme to have to kind of reckon with that.
She does. Okay, I see the square. It's Saturn, the moon in Pisces that's in the 6th house of service, square Saturn, square moon, square Venus in Jupiter. So she loved communicating. It was in her 9th house. She was really smart. Venus opposite Saturn. So that square there is going to like put restrictions on what she loves and is comfortable with and how she expresses herself. And also like Mercury is square Mars. So I feel like the way she thinks and how she is active in the world are at odds.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is like pretty evident over here. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, like, you know, when I was doing this research, what came up like really intensely was this notion that like it was almost like a revelation. Like, you know how like we're finding out that like everyone in Hollywood is kind of a pervert. You know what I mean? Like, you know, not to draw the broadest generalization, but like there's this way in which like we're looking at celebrities with a new eye given all the information that has come out. This was a similar experience for me. Like, you know, I sat down and I thought about the fact that like these couples were in the time that they were at, you know, in the like little frame that everyone in the 19, like, you know, this is what, the 50s and 60s, that frame that they held in front of them, was one where, oh, wow, like I love when I just like lose my track of thought in the sentence. Let me find it. Let me just like reorient. Oh yeah. The frame that they were in was that they were like they're one of these like honorable couples, and like every single one of the piles, with the exception of maybe like Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda, every single one of the piles of research that I have here, like what I was revealed is that like the picture that we're shown and the picture that we believe is there is absolutely not the experience that is had. And so like even these like high atop the thing elevated positions of like that's really a love story, the revolutionaries, but it turns out like with a little tiny bit of research that all of these men were abusive, all of them, like without.
I know the story we're told is that they are so noble. These married couples are noble and they do good, and we should strive for that, but there's like another story behind it.
Always. And it had me believing that like marriage is a psyop. You know, like, and like for those listeners that like don't know what psyop means, it's a military operation usually aimed at influencing the enemy's state of mind through non-combative means. Like, so these like stories about like what love is and what marriage is and what it is to like live a profound life, they're constructed on like no real basis of like just the tiniest look at the research. And
for the government, like just for the man to work, right? The woman is a helpmate in these marriages.
Yeah, it's like her,
like in more ways than one, not just like cooking and doing dishes, but like intellectually and inspirationally, they were like being siphoned from, I would guess.
It was a siphoning, because you think that they're working together for the common good. You think that they're like putting, you know, they're both throwing their backs into the things, but all of these men like just extorted the labor and like actually responded to it with abuse. Like in this article, the Times article that I keep on quoting from, you know, she like accepted some bad treatment, you know, like let me see this. Hosanna Williams, who said that he witnessed King's cruel treatment of Coretta on more than one occasion. In quotes, "Shut up and go in the back room," Williams said he heard Martin yell at Coretta. She would get up quietly and go on back. Martin told her this many times. You know, so he was like openly disrespectful to her. And like, I almost have to wonder if you are extorting someone's labor, if you are kind of taking from someone and not crediting them in one way or another, you're dehumanizing them. And once someone's dehumanized, then like it's like once you have like taken someone's like human status and put them into a subservient, like less than position, it just seems like the psychological, like, you know, what happens to the slave owner. And that's like a really strong phrase given what I'm looking at in front of me, and I don't mean to say it, but I said it, and I think that saying it makes me like stop and say, like, each one of these, as we like look at all of these women and their stories, like each one of them like came to their, you know, came to their roles as like not just collaborators, but like in some senses like downright plagiarism. You know, Coretta was and it says so right here, and I mean I have to do a little bit more of a deep dive to like, you know, double check on that, but that she was doing activism, like that's what attracted him to her, was that she was already like well on the way doing this work. In fact, she I think it was like a group of women, and I have to find the notes, but I think it was a group of women that did all of the organizing around the bus boycott. I think that was like I have notes in here where I wrote that down, and I'm just gonna see if I can find it. Yeah, so like here.
Well, you can see, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, go.
Martin Luther King's chart now, like, you can see why they got together. Like, he also has Moon and Venus and Pisces. Like, she has a strong Pisces. He has strong, so, like, they're so caring, and but it's square Saturn and also Mars. So the same restrictions and same like issues that they probably connected on together, like how they got together. They have just a lot of similarities. And his sun is conjunct to midheaven in Capricorn, so she's probably drawn to that huge ambition because she has midheaven, a lot of strong midheaven also. And then you look at their, I'm sorry, just keep holding on to that thought that I interrupted you on.
No.
Their composite chart, because you hear like, oh, she's being abused, and he like, but you can't imagine why they stay together. But you look at how their charts come together in a composite, you see that there's all this these binding forces. So Sun conjunct Moon, conjunct Mercury and Pisces at the top of the chart, and then midheaven with Uranus, Jupiter, and Venus in Aries, and she needs that Aries energy, but it's also square Saturn, and that's going to hold them in a pattern that's difficult to release from. So they were like working partners as much as like they were confused. There was probably like a confusing romance surrounding their love.
Oh, I bet.
That could lead to abuse. If she's depressed and he wants like all this power, but he's taken her power away, it sends her into like, she's not fulfilling her ambition.
Yeah,
I don't know.
She sort of like, there's just in this article and some of the research that I did, it was really obvious that she wanted a greater role, and she was definitely like, pushed into the corner. But I like looking at the charts because, like I find that like when people talk about domestic abuse in one way or another, like we kind of miss the point that like as horrible as it is, and it's really horrible, and I'm speaking as a domestic abuse survivor, there's a love story to reckon with despite and maybe even in conjunction with that abuse, like it's the and I think that this is where like a lot of men misunderstand like the notion of domestic abuse, and like when people kind of turn around and they say like, oh, like why didn't you just leave? It's like weirdly a part of the love story, and I'm not like saying that that's a good thing in any way, shape, or form. I know it's like kind of a subversive thing to bring to the table, but like abuse and love are like love. We think of love as like this pure thing, but abuse and love can often sort of like go together. Like those things like aren't necessarily like mutually exclusive. Does that sound crazy? It might be.
That's exactly why it's so confusing. It leaves people confused and not knowing how to like come back to yourself. Like, because it is a violence and love. Love is so binding. It's the most binding force in the world. That's why babies get taken care of. Like, it's so difficult, but the mother loves them so much. But that's not what we should be.
Well, like love is the most powerful binding force there is. Like to just like sit with that sentence for like 1 minute and like, love is the most powerful binding force that is. Now you're bound by the most powerful binding force there is. Now you add violence to that, and we have like that is like the kicker when it comes to domestic violence, is that you're already bound by the most powerful binding agent imaginable. And then to bring violence in there, it seems like these are like opposite things. Like, how could the love be real and the violence be real? Certainly the love can't be real if the violence is real. And I actually don't think that like love operates quite in that way. I don't think it follows rules. I think these things and her case is pretty significant, in terms of like there being definitely infidelity. In fact, all of the women that we're looking at suffered like infidelity. No, everyone cheated. All of them. Every single time I like sat down to like look at a couple and like think about their charts, all of these men cheated. Every single one. There wasn't like not one of them didn't. And like the thing about I was reading this and I was looking at this like women didn't get credit for their place in this movement as much as like how do I put this, because like they're absolutely here. Anybody like looking would find like the women that are like spearheading this like effort. But like the civil rights movement, when I think of it, when my mind goes to the civil rights movement, because I'm white and I grew up in a very mixed place, but like I think of the Million Man March, civil rights movement. I don't like operate around this notion of like when I see the civil rights movement in my head, a bunch of men pop up and the Million Man March pops up. But what I realized when I was looking at this research is that like I'm like hoping to like, you know, sometimes like I put a note down and it's like right in front of my face. But the women were really much more like a part of like what made this happen than we even realize. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I have no idea. Like, Coretta Scott King's, like, there's not like a legacy, right? There's a Martin Luther King legacy. Like, streets are named after him, and you see his face everywhere. Like, Coretta Scott King seems like
she's like yeah, and that's and like there's and nothing could be further from the truth. Like, she inspired him, you know, at every single level. They worked strategy together at every single level. You know, like she basically, he wasn't even home a lot of the time. Like, you know, like she made it possible for him to be like a father and a husband and also have this role, you know, as a civil rights leader. And what I think is so interesting about that is that when the rubric with which we measure success, like and how like successful one can be is totally thrown by the fact that for hundreds of years all success was a two-person job given to a one-person credit. And so like this throws off the balance on, you know, like the most fundamental understanding of what it means to be a successful person in the world. These men that we're looking at, like, were incredibly successful, with some of them a little bit, you know, more than others, but these men were incredibly successful because all of the executive functioning in their lives, like all of the labor that goes into taking care of yourself on a day-to-day basis, was not there.
Damn.
Like, you know what I would be capable of as an artist and a person if I had like a person taking care of me like a baby?
Yeah.
That in and of itself, not to mention that these women were actively involved. Like in this quote here, Dr. King respected and relied on his wife's opinion when it came to high-level questions of strategy. He genuinely valued her thinking. People in the office, oh yeah, there's this notion about like, you know, yeah, like she was involved to the extent that he let her be involved. But at the same time, like, you know, she's a big part of this that just doesn't like make the story, like we don't see that featured the way that we should. And I love when you said the word legacy, because this is what we're talking about, the theft of legacy. Women have suffered the theft of legacy.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. All of these women suffered the theft of legacy. Let me look at this. And she did a lot of work. I mean, she was, you know, in the public eye quite often. Like she did, like, you know, she certainly threw her back into it. But, oh, here's the thing. I was like looking for my notes. You know, women have been the backbone of the whole civil rights movement, Coretta wrote in the article. Women have made it possible for the movement to be a mass movement. It was a simple fact, but nevertheless an overlooked one. In Montgomery, Parks had sparked the bus boycott, and Joanne Robinson and the Women's Political Council had launched it. Never did I read Women's Political Council launched the bus boycott. Never did I see that, like, you know, never did a teacher kind of say that to me. And I know I'm like broadcasting my ignorance, but I think that like broadcasting our ignorance, or my ignorance anyway, like is the way to begin to talk about this stuff.
At college, you think they would teach it there? Like, we would know from college that like it's a big part of it. Like, I had no idea until you're telling me this right now that this was fact.
We went to Antioch College, and Coretta Scott King was a fellow alum, and we'd never heard about her contributions to the civil rights movement. Not only that, but she had to like actively go against the school when it came to her internship teaching. I just see, I get this overwhelming sense of somebody who is like summoning all of their strength and running with all of their might, and time and again just getting knocked down by like these structures around her, and I could go on with this, you know, Orella Bowder, Claudette Colvin, Susie McDonald, and Mary Louise Smith had served as plaintiffs in the federal lawsuit that led to the Supreme Court decision that desegregated the city's buses. Those are all, like, where's that emphasis on their role? Like, it's kind of amazing that I don't know these names. And then there were the countless, and the quote goes on, and then there were the countless women such as Coretta Scott King and Juanita Abernathy, who endured many of the same perils as their husbands while receiving little credit for their work that included not only marching and organizing, but also taking care of children, filling in for their husbands, and advising their spouses on matters of strategy, leadership, and politics. That blows my mind. That blows my mind.
We pay her for her time and energy with utmost kindness and devotion. That's where I get confused and my heart breaks.
Yeah. Well, that's where that's why, when I was like, I hate the phrase, the women behind the great men, but it's like been used so many times. And when I sat down to kind of look at it, I'm like, these guys are not that great. They're not great at all. The women are great. The women are showing greatness. The women are I'm going a little too far because, Martin Luther King did do great things. Like, I'm not, completely dismissing that or dismissing any of the accomplishments, but all of these accomplishments in my mind go into the toilet and get flushed under the mantle of they were so shitty to their wives, like so unbelievably shitty to their wives, and that just kind of throws a major wrench, in the whole thing, because these women were doing the exact amount of, like, I think, sort of array of labors, but they also had, in addition to that, childcare and household management. So they had 2 jobs.
Yeah, so their passion and interests are being taken up by just the duties of the day, like just like cleaning and taking care of what's it called?
Executive functioning of the household, all of that.
Yeah, the minutia of the day. That's not like the greater picture, but just survival.
And the strength training that is involved in both, like, meeting the expectations of a movement that you're spearheading and taking care of a household, it's incredible. And so it's almost like I feel like there should be, like, greater credit awarded, not less credit awarded. The strength training that is involved with that kind of a balance, and having to do those kinds of a balance is like amazing.
The endurance and strength training, and then to, like, not be always praised and flattered by your husband, but instead be berated.
Yeah,
or
almost like publicly humiliated. This whole thing about, like, go in the back room, and like that paints a picture that I like I almost, like, I'm so sad, like, because that's a hard life. When you really think about it, your greatest achievements are, you're, like, buried alive, under your husband's legacy. And on top of that, he wasn't even very nice to you. I mean, I'm sure. And again, back to this notion of, like, typecasting love. Like, love is so complicated, that it's.
Yeah, on their composite chart, they have Venus conjunct Chiron. So it's a painful connection.
What does that mean?
Venus conjunct Chiron in a composite. I think when you're together, it's like a touch of a painful heart. Like there's hurt from within and hurt from without, and that's just the nature of how you appreciate each other.
Man, there's this quote here. It's a great temptation, Coretta wrote, to demand more of my husband's attention. We women are like that, but I have had to realize that he belongs to the world and therefore cannot be the same kind of husband and father he would like to be.
Like, yeah, his Jupiter in this industry falls on her Sun conjunct Chiron, so he really, like, magnifies her painful, like, her plight, which is to carry the wound, but also, like, improve the world, like, raise children, make things better. But he shined on that a lot.
Oh my gosh, there's this one section here when he was, let's see. When he arrived in Washington, D.C. to meet with President Johnson and witness Johnson's signature of the Voting Rights Act, joining King were Roy Wilkins, James Farmer, and Rosa Parks, among others. Coretta King watched the ceremony on television. Like, what? What? She's like, that's painful. And she goes, it was one of the few occasions, she wrote years later, that she felt sorry for herself. I felt very supportive of his being there, she wrote, but I also had this feeling of being alone and being entirely by myself. makes me so mad.
Yeah. That makes sense in her chart.
How so?
She's sad. Well, it's like the Sun conjunct Chiron and the sadness of her Pisces 6th house. It just, yeah, the frustration.
What is like, if we were to like cast her in the most beautiful light, which I think that like, in honor of her, like what about her chart like makes her the most beautiful woman in the world? Like I think that all of the women need a little bit of praise because like the chart is like what we have, in terms of a story.
That's such a good question. It's definitely her 10th house, the Cancer with the Mars and Pluto. I mean, she's so deep. There's so much depth to her action, herself, and she could communicate it. But there was just like there's not a flow here. I'm seeing like it's like a pulling back. An archer pulls something back. Like she's the bow. She's the bow that holds something. She's a super solid and has a lot of like deep like mud. I'm just like very thick and heavy. I don't know why I'm seeing that, but so much.
I mean. There's this crazy thing that I found, and I'm going to talk about it because I think that it's really interesting, and I know why I haven't seen it break as a news story in any way. But actually, I'm like sort of being reminded. Like before I do that, I want to let you finish. I'm such an interrupter.
Oh no, yeah, like some charts are hard to read. Some don't come out that clearly, and I that's what I get. Like you want the most beautiful light. I think that she is. I don't know.
Maybe it's a hard life that you're looking at.
I mean, like Sun in the 8th, Sun conjunct Chiron. I keep coming back to that in the 8th house, and the 8th house is the house of Scorpio. So that's like a hard place to have your ego exist in. I think she like rises up with her strength and gets taken down over and over. Choose the mud, and she gets nourishment from it. But she also has this ability to like hold others in attention.
Oh, that's beautiful.
She can launch others.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like I feel that very powerfully, this notion of like rising up and then like the thwarting. And while I was doing my research, I came across this article in I will link it below because I used Print Friendly to print some of this stuff out, and I thought that it would be here, but I'll link it below. But there was a guy named David Garrow, and he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer of Martin Luther King Jr., and he unearthed information that really like may forever change King's legacy. I'm going to read this. In an 8,000-word article published in the British periodical Standpoint magazine on May 30th, Garrow details the contents of FBI memos he discovered after spending weeks sifting through more than 54,000 documents located on the National Archives website. Initially sealed by court order until 2027, the documents ended up being made available in recent months through the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. Now, before I get into this, I want to start by saying that, like, when it comes to the FBI and when it comes to law enforcement and when it comes to the civil rights movement, what we have here is like the notes taken by an FBI agent about what he was hearing they did a bunch of surveillance. They had like FBI surveillance on Martin Luther King. And so it was the notes of the FBI agent who was listening to the surveillance recordings. And so we have to like be very careful because, if you like, I can just like picture like a mean, like smelly man, like for some reason, like, I have a whole image in my head. And I think that it's a good image to like put out there as not necessarily the true picture, but like for us to like be cautious around. So like if you can like, like err on the side of caution in the sense if we can like picture like the meanest FBI agent who is like hearing like sounds of like snoring or deep breathing and like interpreting as like something that it's not, like we won't have access to the actual recordings that these notes were taken about until 2027, because that part of it was not part of the Records Collection Act of 1992. But the notes say, and this is kind of crazy. Let's look at this. So the most damaging memos describe King witnessing a rape in a hotel room. Instead of stopping it, handwritten notes in the files say he encouraged the attacker to continue. I think that's why I hate him as much as I do. As soon as I saw that.
I feel so skeptical though. I feel like, is that, I mean, we have information about how he treated Coretta, but like, could that be character assassination by an FBI agent?
Totally. Absolutely. That's why I said, it's like we have to kind of picture that the meanest FBI agent, like, was sitting there interpreting who knows what. But these are notes for, like he's listening to the recordings. The recordings we'll get in 2027.
That is incredible, right? So in 3 years it'll be revealed?
In 3 years it'll be revealed. The FBI... Yeah. It says here, the FBI files contain some other notable information. Garrows writes that King may have fathered a daughter with Dolores Evans, a girlfriend who is still alive and living in Los Angeles. The memos also detailed the closeness of his relationship with Dorothy Cotton, a longtime associate. So he had some infidelity going on. Definitely at least that with Cotton. That's like pretty well documented. Many of these transcripts were based on audio tapes that are still sealed under court order. So, like, that's why we're waiting till 2027 to, like, actually know what the source material is, because these are notes on that source material. But there were, and that's why, like, this hasn't been published. Like, he was, I mean, it's been published, but, like, very, very little has been published in terms of this because, that you can't, if you can't listen to the actual recordings that the documents are based on, you can't make any, like, firm conclusions. I'm just bringing it up because, like, her chart is so heavy. And like that, and there is a lot of evidence of verbal abuse, in terms of the quotes of the, people who, heard him tell her to go in the back room. And you see in terms of her writing where she has like gone to her husband and been like, I want to be more involved. I want to be, like I want more participation. And he said, no. He said, no.
Yeah. Her chart, like what I see, like her very existence is depressing. Like it's sad is what I read. That's like the word that comes through. Even though she has so much power and so much influence publicly in a life of service, and she can communicate, like she has all these strengths, but it just like she's like I see her arms are held down by chains. Like there's still like a she's not free.
Well, that's a common experience of like all of these women that we're talking about, and I think and women that were born, during these the different times that we're like going over, like in the past, women that were born in the past. And I think that like really looking at this and examining it, and I get it. This is like for us, we were like talking about it kind of like a fun exercise. Like let's look at the composite charts of like these people and like what are we gonna find? And for me, it was just like unearthing like, oh my gosh. But this notion of like women's almost like being like consumed into their like husband and like it's like a disappearing almost. And I'm sure, like there is, of course, this other side of it, kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier around this notion of like these like love stories and like the climate of the times and like everything that went into, I don't want to say it's like these love stories are really complicated by the fact that they weren't particularly free. And I was thinking about the civil rights movement, and I was thinking about Martin Luther King, and I was thinking about Coretta, and I was thinking about the civil rights movement being so, this movement for freedom, and she wasn't free to do what she wanted in that relationship. She was deferring to him, and that's just a weird like juxtaposition.
But is it like for the greater cause? Like I will submit to my husband for the greater cause? Kind of attitude? Absolutely.
And being a helpmate, and they're Christians. And so there's all kinds of like you submit to your husband, you're the helpmate. And the patriarchy is set up in such a way that, like I said earlier, like our whole rubric of what it means to succeed and what it means to be a successful person is thrown by the fact that women were, like, I don't want to call them slaves because I don't want to disempower anyone, as we're like kind of doing this, Coretta was strong. She was like a powerful force in the community, and she was held in like such high, ultimate like high regard. It's just that she was just as much a part of what Martin Luther King was doing. It's not like he had this whole like life before he met her. You know, she was a part of that journey and a part of like making that happen in a very profound way. And she was an activist before him. You know, there's this quote here. I'm gonna find it.
So it's not so much Martin Luther King's problem. It's a public, like how things are, the propaganda.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's everyone's problem. And I think that if we don't look at the fact that it's everyone's problem, like these stories need to be retold. That's kind of part of the healing work that I think that we have to do is like when we think about accomplishment and when we're measuring our own selves against like what we're capable of. You know, when I think of my life and I'm like, oh, you know, all this talent and stuff like that, like how far can I get in a given day? Well, when I'm doing all of like the labor of taking care of myself and, you know, women, especially women taking care of children, that doesn't leave a lot of room.
But the women become like invisible in our consciousness. Like we see the face, but it doesn't stick. Whereas like for some reason the men's faces stick. I don't know if it's like repetition that we see them so often. And so it sticks like an icon. It's iconographic patriarchy.
Yeah, totally.
If we saw that king like all over and over again in statues and on dollar bills, like she would be an icon.
Yeah. I mean, right here it says King was attracted to Coretta in no small part because her experience as an activist exceeded his own. Her experience as an activist exceeded his own when they met.
And he saw that and took it almost. Not consciously, but maybe.
Well,
definitely unconsciously.
I think that that's kind of like what, like, you know, what looking at these couples, you know, critically in terms of like, yeah, products of the times, but we have to recast these stories just for our own purposes. Because King, like, you know, I always thought of Martin Luther King as like a saint.
They did love each other in the synastry. Like they both had. He has Mars and Jupiter. She has Venus and Jupiter. I mean, like when you have personal planets in the same sign, like there's just a connection. It's easy. And Moon conjunct Jupiter for her in Pisces, and he had Moon conjunct Venus in Pisces. Like that's a huge. They had the same moon sign, and like they were.
What does that do? Like when people have the same moon sign, like how does that work out? Like practically,
they're so comfortable with each other. The same things make you happy. It's just very easy. And if you have other planet like Jupiter, makes everything better. And Venus being there, like it was very sweet, probably, on one hand. Jupiter, I mean, like the Gemini and Pisces stuff that they have connected in the sun on his rising with Jupiter. I mean, there's a lot going on with this industry that you would see, like, oh, there's an enmeshment, I guess.
Where do you see the enmeshment in the chart?
The same moon signs, like that Pisces moon, it probably... They could never leave each other. And then, the rising with the sun conjunct Chiron, like, they complemented each other. They liked each other, even if he treated her like a punching bag.
And, like, I don't know that he necessarily treated her like a punching bag, but he certainly didn't, like, treat her well in terms of, like, her requests for greater involvement, you know, crediting her. I mean, like, that moment, you know, signing that, like, how did she end up watching from TV? Like, the like, pivotal moment, you know, of the civil rights movement. And over here, you know, like, he had affairs. Like, there's a quote here, and I'll put all of the articles, like, below so that people can look at them and see the authors and everything. But soon after King's death, several members of his inner circle, including Ralph Abernathy, stated publicly discussing King's philandering. At the time, many justified his behavior by saying it was no different from the biblical David writing his psalms by day, only to be relieved at night by his concubines. That was like that was like rationale. Like, oh, like
biblical rationale.
Yeah, biblical rationale for cheating was like, oh, King David, and like concubines to a king are slaves, like quite literally, like that's kind of, and that's like, that's another thing, like it's not a concubine, it's a sex slave. Like, I mean, again, I am not like that well versed on the research, and we are kind of just, talking about this like in very broad terms, but I'm sure if I went and looked at like, the setup of the concubines, like these aren't free women. And I think that's like, we have these people who are so like so awakened. Martin Luther King and his wife at that point in time, both of them activists, both of them fighting, for civil rights. They were very like, aware of like equality and like what it means to like have equality and fight for equality and work towards equality, but they didn't have an equality in their home.
Yeah, awakened, yet a product of the times they were in. Crazy.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, I don't know if like any of this stuff about, like him, like the sexual exploits of Martin Luther King, as taken from like the transcripts of the person who was listening in on all of the surveillance. But it's certainly, 2027 is not that long from now. Like we will sort of have to like revisit this once those recordings come out.
Yeah.
And it's weird to me that they're sealed the way that they are.
It's just weird.
But, so I want to kind of, like, before we move to the next sort of couple, like, it's in some ways, everything you're telling me about the chart is just like such an idyllic, beautiful relationship in certain aspects, but it's the structure of the times and the corruption of what it meant to like be like, grow up in an environment where the like excuse for cheating was that like King David of the Bible did it.
Yeah, I think so. I think if this chart appeared in another time, but it couldn't. Like planets are in their place because of the year they're born. Like you can't move Pluto out of Cancer. They both have Pluto and Cancer, which is like, what does that mean? I never even thought about that.
Pluto and Cancer. Okay, so that is going to be like deep, like dark, depthy transformation.
Yeah.
In like a liminal space at home.
Interesting. That's trine their Venus moon. So that's probably working. It's feeding into this connection here, is that Pluto and Cancer. That's like, that marks their generation. So that's what they're doing in their lifetime, is like gutting out the home and how you care for another in probably the most brutal way, so that they can like restructure it. I don't know what their kids' lives are like. I wonder how those 3 kids that she raised, how their relationships came out. Well, like, are they repeating the same things their parents did, or do they have like a better?
I think that if you're born with a modern worldview and you like have like the influence of, activists, civil rights sort of, like, I would imagine that like, I think that the darkest parts of what we're looking at, like I do, without like not, it's not about like, excusing things or anything like that, but I do think that there is a destructive force, and that's why I was like, is marriage a psyop? Like, you know what I mean? Like all of these love stories, like, and we aspire to the love story, we're given a love story, we're indoctrinated with love stories, and we're given, the script that says like, that a marriage is almost kind of like, I don't even know what you would call it, but like, no, the love stories, I think, like, if we got out of like the patriarchal like influence, you know what I mean, and if we were to actually be really honest about what love stories are like a mess. And if people were sort of like raised on love stories are a mess, and love stories have like, staying power issues, you know what I mean, if we had a more complex view of like how love operates, then I think we would have a lot easier time in relationships. Like in the same way that the rubric of success is like that one man can do all of this. No, he can't. He needs a slave to do all of that, or he needs a servant to do all of that. And so I'm not going to judge myself against somebody who had, somebody taking care of them all the time. And this notion of relationships as being something that, is like some sort of form of like, like safe, perfected love. I don't know. Like I'm kind of reaching for the right words with like the ideal the ideal isn't even it isn't even real.
It's just a fiction.
It is a fiction. Because even in the best relationships, there's still a much more complex, like, array of things going on at all times.
Yeah, true.
Let's look at Albert Einstein and Mileva. This is another one of these that I was like, oh my God, how can you? So she contributed to, like, so much of his work. So I'm going to...
Their composite is amazing. Like, I look through their natals and like, yeah. I see their synastry and it's I can see why they're together. But they're super good synastry. But their composite is crazy. They have a huge stellium in an 11th house Aquarius. So that's like Aquarius in Aquarius house. Like, that is...
What does that mean?
And humanity forever. And then it's a opposite Uranus. So they have just this, like, the changing geniuses. Like, they're incredible together. Like, together the thing they made is all Aquarian.
Well, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. When I was thinking, that they're relativity. When I was looking at this, I kept on thinking, like, I was reading this research, and what popped into my head time and time again was, like, that Shakespeare didn't write things on his own. That there was somebody else there. And with, the research that I did, and I'm going to read a quote here. While nobody has been able to credit her with any specific part of his work, their letters and numerous testimonies presented in the books dedicated to her provide substantial evidence on how they collaborated from the time they met in 1896 up to their separation in 1914. So
yeah, that's interesting. Well, she needed him. He was the vehicle to serve her work. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about them, but I see their charts, and she's very private. She has Sun conjunct Mercury in the 12th house and Sag. She's like the most, she wants to work alone. And everything is at the bottom of the chart. 4th house moon conjunct the North Node. And she's just, like, wants to work alone and have privacy. And then his chart, it's all at the top of the chart, like Midheaven Sun and Mercury up the top. He is very good in the public. He's probably a great public speaker, charismatic.
Yeah, well, I mean, they both had a shared passion for physics, but he was able to, like, actually do something with it, and she was only really able to support him with her genius, because she did better in school than he did, actually. Like, I have to find that quote. So they became inseparable at college or school. Albert and Mileva were admitted to the physics mathematics section of the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich in 1896 with 3 other students, and they're
inseparable. That's so cute, because they have exact degree Sun conjunct Moon in the synastry. They're the same exact degree. So who's on the outside? Oh, herself, her ego and who she is makes him feel so at home, like so good, so comforted. And then his Mercury conjunct Saturn is conjunct her Moon and North Node. So, like, when he talks and communicates, she feels so at home and so comfortable. Like, they are just, like, so cute together.
They were. And the thing is, though, there's even a quote in here in terms of, like,
he cheat on her. I can't bear it if he did.
Oh, he definitely. Oh, wait until you hear the tea. Like, this is, I think I came into this podcast, like, bitter from research, because I would see, like, how much, like, these women contributed, and then, like, every single time rewarded with, like, really harsh, like, miserable treatment. So they were in classes together, and they had similar grades, 4.7 and 4.6 respectively. So I thought she was smarter than him, but they're neck and neck over here. Except in applied physics, where she got a top mark of 5, but he only 1. She excelled at experimental work while he did not. But it was an oral exam with a male professor that, like, threw her. She loved her work. There's no two ways about it. I think that they really, like, got together on this notion that she, like, really loved the work. But 100%, she submitted so much of it. There's no question about that. And it's interesting with the Nobel Prizes, like in both in the research I was looking at in the different articles, both women are quoted as saying our article or our prize. Well, she says our article, Melva, and then Coretta said our Nobel Prize. And I think that it's because they really understood that they were the reason, absolutely, without any,
That is so interesting.
It says here, the decision to publish only under his name seems to have been taken jointly. She suggests that Mileva probably wanted to help Albert make a name for himself. Given that the prevalent bias against women at the time, a publication co-signed with a woman might have carried less weight, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, he wants him to be able to support them together. So she would sacrifice her name, cancel herself out, erase it, so that they can have stability.
Oh yeah. She collaborated on Special Relativity, and a lot of there was this notion of her notes are whole pages were in her handwriting.
Damn.
So much of what they published.
I didn't even heard her name before yesterday. That was the first time I heard her name. It's Einstein everything. It's never Einstein and Layla.
Never. I mean, and it says here, he commented on, so he had a really, really busy year, and it was kind of amazing. Out of nowhere, he started, they get married and then he's having a stellar year. After, over here it says, where is it? Let me find it. That relativity had been his life for 7 years, and the photoelectric effect for 5 years. One of his biographers wrote that while after having spent 5 weeks to complete the article containing the bias of special relativity, Albert went to bed for 2 weeks. Mileva checked the article again and again and then mailed it. So she was going over everything that he did. Exhausted, the couple made the first of 3 visits to Serbia, where they met numerous relatives and friends, whose testimonies provide a wealth of information on how Albert and Mileva collaborated. They collaborated. They were both physicists.
Yeah. I mean, how could she not? I mean, it makes perfect sense, of course.
Yeah. And Mileva...
I still can't make sense of it. I can't even, picture her. Because we have no, promotion. Nothing promotes the wife.
Nothing. The legacies were stolen. All of the women that we're talking about have stolen legacies. Which is crazy when you think about, the value of a legacy. Right here it says Mileva's brother, and I hope I'm saying her name right. I have auditory processing issues, so I might be butchering it, but forgive me if I am. Mileva's brother described how during the evenings and at night, when silence fell upon the town, the young married couple would sit together at the table, and at the light of a kerosene lantern, they would work together on physics problems. She calculated, wrote, and worked with Albert. The couple often sat in the garden to discuss physics. So, they were, all of these breakthroughs came from their conversation. And maybe not all of the breakthroughs came from just their conversations, but clearly they're spending all of their time together talking about physics. They have these breakthroughs, and then he gets the credit for all of them. But it did not go well for her.
What happened?
Well, before I even go into how it didn't go well, he even said, Albert would have declared, "I need my wife. She solves for me all my mathematical problems."
No.
Something Mileva is said to have confirmed.
What the hell? I'm shocked.
Yeah, it says here that he had that this, and this is I never heard of this stuff. No one ever kind of explained. I think Albert Einstein, and I see the smartest man. No, his wife solved all his mathematical problems. Nobody mentions that.
Well, is she on the Nobel Prize with him?
No, but she got the money. As part of their divorce agreement, she got the money. And it gets whatever their cute sweetness is, it gets really ugly.
Oh my God. What happened? They got divorced and she got the money from the Nobel Prize? That's him admitting.
Oh, it definitely was. But he went back on that admitting. He told everybody that it was for his sons. He gave the money for his sons, but it's part of their divorce agreement. Meaning and she kind of threatened to expose how much she had done for him. In fact, there's a quote here that I'll read.
Wait, before you read it, he is a dick. Let me tell you why. Because he has Venus conjunct Mercury and Saturn in Aries in the 10th house, and he has what does he have? Square Mars and Capricorn.
How does that make him a dick though? Like, explain the dynamics of the different.
Venus in Aries, and it just makes you feel so self-centered. Like you're a baby and you want what you want now. And he has Saturn there, so he's probably very serious and very structured and not very fun. And square Mars and Capricorn, he's very ambitious and cold. But it's confusing because he has Sun in Pisces, which makes him seem so loving, and Moon in Sag, which makes him seem like fun and philosophical and so educated. So...
Well, in 1912, he started an affair with his cousin Elsa while visiting his family, who had moved to Berlin.
He wanted what he wanted. He's like, my cousin's hot. I want to fuck her.
Yeah,
that's an Aries and Venus thing.
Is it? Yeah, because definitely, they maintained a secret correspondence for 2 years, and during this period, Albert held various faculty positions. So this was something that he did to be closer to Elsa, or it just so happened that it made him closer to her. But this definitely caused their marriage to collapse. Mileva moved back to Zurich with her 2 sons on 29th July 1914. In 1919, she agreed to divorce, with a clause stating that if Albert ever received the Nobel Prize, she would get the money.
Wow.
When she did, she got the money. But in 1925, Albert wrote in his will that the Nobel Prize money was his son's inheritance. So he really wanted to make a note of it, and she got mad. Mileva strongly objected, stating the money was hers, and considered revealing her contributions to his work. She considered revealing her contributions to his work. And then he wrote her a letter on October 25th, 1925 that said, "You made me laugh when you started threatening me with your recollections. Have you ever considered, even just for a second, that nobody would ever pay attention to your says if the man you talked about had not accomplished something important?"
Whoa.
And then he goes on to say, "When someone is completely insignificant, there is nothing else to say to this person but to remain modest and silent. This is what I advise you to do."
Slay! So good.
No, he said that to her.
Oh, he said it to her?
Yeah,
oh my God, horrible!
No.
I thought she was such a villain, but he's an asshole.
No. He said to her, when you're threatening me by saying that you're going to expose how much you contributed, have you considered that nobody would pay attention to you unless I did something because you're insignificant?
Oh my God, I get it now. Oh.
And she did all his math. What is physics? If somebody else is doing your math, I guess the theorizing and the theoretical stuff, but she also, when they looked at his lecture notes, they would half that stuff, well, not half it, but there's a significant portion that was in her handwriting. So it's for him to then turn around and say oh, you think you can tell somebody and that they'll care? They only care about me because I achieved something. He achieved something because of her.
Yeah. Oh my God. So she also raised their kids.
Mm-hmm. And he completely screwed her over.
Yeah, gave her no credit. And we're still questioning her contribution to this day, or just finding out.
Yeah. I mean, the quote here says, Mileva spoke of her contributions to her mother and sister. She also wrote to her godparents explaining how she had always collaborated with Albert and how he had ruined her life, but then she asked them to destroy the letter. Her son, Hans Albert, told Christic, I don't know who that is, but it's here, in my notes quoted. And again, I'll put the articles below. Scientific collaboration continued into their marriage, and that he remembered seeing them work together in the evenings at the same table. The fact that she got she was a physicist. She should have been credited on these articles. Their letters and the numerous testimonies show that Mileva and Albert collaborated closely from their school days up to 1914. Albert referred to it repeatedly in his letters, like when he wrote "Our Work on Relative Motion."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be anyone else, right? It was just him with her.
Yeah.
There's eyewitnesses.
She was the first one to recognize his talent. He wouldn't have succeeded without her, assist. I don't think he would have succeeded without her assistance. You want to get sick? You want to get really upset and angry?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let me read you the rules that he gave her to follow as a wife. Let me go find that. So he made her follow like main rules, so conditions. So Einstein, like after their relationship started to deteriorate, he created a like, and then this is in, you know, he wrote this like really nasty list of conditions for her. So here's her conditions. She who like gave him like all of her like intellectual capacity that she had, she that like did all of this work for him and like, you know, basically positioned him in the position that he was, because they started in the same place. They both went to school together. But then he comes down and says like, that his conditions for her is that and then it says here, conditions, you will make sure that my clothes and laundry are kept in good order, that I receive my 3 meals regularly in my room, that my bedroom and study are kept neat, and especially that my desk is left for my use only. You will renounce all personal relations with me insofar as they are not completely necessary for social reasons. Specifically, you will forego 1, my sitting at home with you, 2, my going out or traveling with you. C, you will obey the following points in your relations with me. 1, you will not expect any intimacy from me, nor will you reproach me in any way. You will stop talking to me if I request it. You will leave my bedroom or study immediately without protest if I resist it. D, you will undertake not to belittle me in front of our children, either through words or behavior.
This is funny though, because this is like a list I probably got from my ex-husband. Like, this is like the ideal life for a scientific mind who's a man who's like trying to make his career going. Like, there's something wrong there. They want total control.
Yeah.
And just all the space to think about their like, once she gave him the content, he could just go, right? He was like, he was successful. He needed to maintain the success and always be seen as the genius, the brilliant one. And so he had to control her completely as a total supporter.
Yeah.
And he didn't need her mind anymore. I think like she has Mars at 0 degrees Pisces, so she doesn't have that much discipline, and it's in a grand square. So I don't know. I think like, and she also has Moon at 0 degrees Aries. I bet she had a temper. So she probably like went off on him, and he's like, "Fuck this! I can't control your feminine chaos. Do what I want you to do, woman." And so this like list was written. He was so what's the word? Egregious or bold to think he was. I mean, how do you get so confident because of her?
Right. I mean, and like, he's having an affair with his cousin Elsa at this time. His cousin, who he like married Elsa after this divorce.
No.
Yeah. And that was a shitty marriage too. Like, he was a bad partner. Like, that's like well documented. And so, like, once again, like, what we're looking at is like a love story, and, you know, in both, you know, and I think in both charts we see like the love stories began like beautiful love stories. Like, if it was like if it was a movie, it would be like an epic love story, and then at the end of the movie, like, we don't see that the next chapter is like horrible abuse. But I think that that's kind of
it comes in layers for sure. Like, at first I see the beautiful sweetness, and then there's like a layer of like, oh, each individual has complicated things within them, and then it probably feeds into the ultimate outcome of the relationship. Like, he wanted a new relationship. He wanted to be with his cousins. It's like their moms or sisters. So his first cousin, that's so weird and like taboo, right?
Yeah, and like, you know, he's like elevated to the status of like king shit, you know what I mean? And he basically said, "You're insignificant." And there's nothing about like his work that didn't initially, like, there's nothing about his work that did not include her. And yet he has like the balls to say that you're insignificant. And so this is where, like, you know, these love stories turn on this power dynamic dime that is so harsh and so like caustic and toxic. It's just, and that's kind of like, you know, I don't know. Like, I do think that like recasting love in a different light, where like love is the most powerful binding agent, but it can exist with like abuse, and especially when like you are bound by love and then somebody releases themselves, but you're still kind of bound by it. Like the amount of hurt, that goes into what that situation ends up being is significant. So like when we talk about these women and their contributions, we need to really look at the fact that like their legacies were stolen. They were bound to men who like really put them, in the corner in one way or another, even when they gave all of their labor.
They just like put them through meat grinders. Like, you are worthless to me is what I'm reading.
Yeah. Both ended up like, in these situations. And I do think that Coretta and MLK, like, that like we're also like judging these relationships from, just the information that we have. But certainly with Einstein, like he had a full-time collaborator. It's like all of these men who had these great successes, had almost like a staff when it came to like, this woman in their life who was making their success not only possible, but also like they were the face of the work that the couple was doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like he had staff. That's a good way to put it. In one person. How can one person be so many people?
Right. And that one person is, because the wife is not just playing the role of, in both of these instances, the wife is not just playing the role of like collaborator. They're also playing the role of like taking care of this person, like they're like, taking care of their laundry, feeding them 3 meals a day. Like I can't even imagine like some son of a bitch.
And children, like reproducing for them, like, and not getting paid at all, but just getting.
No one was paid. Coretta didn't get to see any of like the wealth. I read somewhere, and I'd have to like pull it up, but like Martin Luther King was really clear that he wanted to take only as much as like the needs like as they needed and put the rest back into the movement, which is totally noble. But at the same time, and we don't know if she might have like completely wholeheartedly agreed with that. But, Mileva was like poverty stricken after that marriage fell apart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's what would happen.
Yeah. Like, and like when we look at this next couple, Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda's epic romance, here he is being celebrated. And I'm like, like here he is being celebrated. And I think I might be related to him. So like there's this, I have this memory of like my sister did an ancestry.com and like, somehow traced that I'm like related to Scott F. Fitzgerald, which I'd have to like look at that myself. But, it was very weird when I was like doing this research and kind of looking at this stuff. And I was thinking to myself, like, ancestor, but like he like took her diaries and plagiarized word for word, like out of her diaries, the books that he was writing. He quoted her in the books that he wrote. He actually yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, imagine like having your like, and she actually fought back to an extent with him too. So she let's see, let me find. She actually wrote a review for one of his books where she like points out that he plagiarized her, like whole portions of her diary.
Their charts are so interesting. Each of their natal charts, they both have these strong stelliums. Especially her chart is the most exceptional. She has a Leo rising conjunct the sun and Mercury. Like she is so smart and so beautiful and fun and loves attention. And it's and she has this huge stellium that goes across Jupiter or Cancer and Gemini. It goes Pluto, Mars, tight conjunction, 1 degree. Venus, Neptune, Moon, and then Venus all together there.
Yeah, well, she's the first flap. Well, she was coined the first flapper, and she was known as being like such a character and like such a larger than life, energy. And they did have a really intense whirlwind romance. I mean, their initial love affair was like off the charts. And that's why like what ended up happening was so like, again, like each one of these stories, like what ends up happening is like so devastating because where you start the story, you get these people who are like really equals, like really amazing. And her poetic and, abilities and her metaphor, these are things that like he ended up like siphoning from her in one way or another. She had an extraordinary ear. But they did fall like madly in love. There's like all of these like
That's her composite chart is exact conjunction of Venus and Sun. They just like love each other. But then I see over here there's a Moon conjunct Pluto, Mars, and Neptune in Gemini. Like there's like they're going down. Is what I see. Like there's a taking down.
Well, like she actually, ended up having like severe mental problems, which whenever someone's put in an institution, when women are institutionalized, I always really wonder about it. There is some evidence that perhaps she had bipolar disorder. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she did have like a very terrible death. But like Scott Fitzgerald was like famous for being like an alcoholic.
Oh no!
And being very and having a very bad command of money. Like money and alcohol were the two great adversaries. This is quoted. Money and alcohol were the two great adversaries with which he battled all his life. And they're buried together in a vault. But
oh yeah, that's so weird because he has Mars exactly conjunct Neptune, conjunct Pluto, and Gemini. Like that's like to me, it seems like a drug addict or alcoholic.
Yeah, definitely.
And he needed to drink to be creative.
Yeah. And like, and that was like a big thing for him. But she wrote a book in like 3 days, and he took years. And there was this one situation where she was writing about her autobiography. Like she wrote an autobiographical. It was fiction, but it was like autobiographical. And he like pitched a horrible fit and said like, you can't publish that. You can't send it to my publisher because I'm writing about that stuff. I'm writing about your biography and my fiction. So you can't write about your biography and your fiction.
Wow.
That was a huge fight, and he gutted her book and took out everything that he wanted to use for his book.
He robbed her.
He robbed her blind.
Yeah.
And she was such a...
Was there an institution to take her work? Or she just lost it? Because she
lost it.
She was born to have an audience. I think she was like... But that she has this 12th house moon in Venus. Like, there's something... that's the hidden enemies house, like something like mysterious and hidden. Oh,
for sure. And like she was so funny. She was actually like really, really funny. Like when she was asked to contribute to Harper and Brothers, and like I'm taking all the quotes, when Harper and Brothers asked Zelda to contribute to favorite recipes of famous women, she wrote, "See if there is any bacon, and if there is, ask the cook which pan to fry it in. Then ask if there are any eggs, and if so, try and persuade the cook to poach 2 of them. It is better not to attempt toast, as it burns very easily. Also, in the case of bacon, do not turn the fire too high, or you will have to get out of the house for a week. Serve preferably on china plates, though gold or wood will do if handy." That was her recipe she submitted. I love her.
That was the Great Gatsby there, right there.
Well, he based his characters on her. In fact, like Daisy was based on her, and like something that she said about her child, like he quoted for his book and just used it.
Yeah.
Like, let me see. What? They were madly in love. Like there's no like doubt about it. But I'm going to read this quote. Zelda allowed him to read her diaries, from which the writer copied entire excerpts to include in his books without acknowledging her contributions.
That's just too much. Giving too much, or something's going on. She allowed it?
Well, I don't know that she wasn't. I don't think she was particularly happy about it. She wrote a review, and I'm going to look for it. And of course, like, one of these days. Oh, yeah. Let's see if I can find it. She wrote a review of one of his books where she told him that, like, yeah, it says, this is her review that she wrote. "It seems to me that on one page I recognize a portion of an old diary of mine which mysteriously disappeared shortly after my marriage, and also scraps of letters which, though considerably edited, sound to me vaguely familiar. In fact, Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe, that is how he spells his name, seems to believe that plagiarism begins at home."
Damn.
Right?
That is a lot.
Oh my gosh.
She fought to defend herself, but like, what did it amount to? Like, we still don't know that he didn't write it.
No. Well, but this is the thing. Like, Scott Fitzgerald is taught in every, like, I think, when do we read that? 9th grade or 10th grade? Like, every school, I think, it has to read The Great Gatsby. And, like, never once do they say, he, like, stole his wife's diaries to create his books with.
Never once.
Like,
they could at least write that on the front page or the preface or something. Like, make that part of the book.
Well,
put her name on it. Written by Zelda Fitzgerald Anna. Right? That's when you retell the story.
Yeah, I think that, like, you know, sort of what we're doing when you sit down and look at this stuff is trying to, like, retell these stories about these great men. And, you know, like, and he did inscribe one of these books. Which one was it? He put an inscription to the first edition: "For my darling wife, my dearest, sweetest Babu, without whose love and aid neither this book nor any other would have ever been possible. From me, who loves her more every day with a heart full of worship for her lovely self." So, like, again, like, a lock of her hair was bound with blue ribbon and pressed inside the cover. Like, they did have this sort of adoration going on.
Yeah. I see this, like, he's very conceptual but lazy, because he has all this air planet trine but a Taurus moon in the 4th house. And she's really interesting. Like, she's a cool character.
Oh, she is.
So clear on her chart. So he thought she was interesting, and I guess she probably thought he was interesting, but he's just like a lazy fucker. He's like a con artist, maybe. Conceptual stuff, but he needs her power to serve what he's conceiving.
Yeah, that's
that.
And then when she tried to, like, you know, write a book on her own, like, that was, like, one of the biggest, like, blowouts between them. Like, and I think this really broke her. I mean, like, I kind of see the story as being about, like, you know, like, the breaking of, like, you know, Daisy. You know, when we think about, like, The Great Gatsby, like, Daisy was created, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Daisy is inspired by her.
Yeah.
And Daisy is such an amazing character. And if the end of the book, if that book ends and she's this amazing character and she's so incredible and oh my gosh, look at her. And that book ends and then she is, like, slowly broken by the man. Like, we never get that second part of the story. Like, when she tried to write a book about her life, it said, I have this quote here: "Her project inspired their most fierce territorial struggle. At issue was their individual right to use their shared autobiographical material. So they fought over, like, their life and just, like, being able to speak about their life. When she suffered her first breakdown 10 years after the wedding, in 1930, the fairy tale ended."
Oh.
Yeah.
In the book, she dies, right? Like a car accident?
I don't think she dies. I think that, like,
She dies.
I remember that, like, I actually, like, it's been so many years, but I think that, like, the story hinges on the fact that, like, maybe it was Gatsby who accidentally killed a woman and tried to cover it up because he had all this wealth, and somehow his life, you know, fell apart, or, like, about that. I'd have to look it up because it's been so long since I read it.
Gatsby dies.
Yeah, I mean, she wrote this novel in 1932, and it says here, yearning to earn her own way in the world, she wrote the novel Save Me the Waltz. Before showing it to Scott, she rushed it to his agent. Scott was understandably irate. It had taken her only a few months of furious activity to write the book. He had been working on Tender as the Night for several years. Had torn up draft after draft and had read her various passages from it. Clearly, Zelda anticipated that Scott would not want her to use exactly the same material that he was using in Tender as the Night. The years they had spent in France and her own mental breakdown. Like, she didn't even own her own mental breakdown.
Yeah.
In the end, she... Huh?
That's just true siphoning. Like, her life and experience is his profit.
Yeah, it's his. He's like, your life is my material. Sorry, you can't use it.
Damn.
It says, in the end, she removed the parts of her manuscript that overlapped or, to Scott's minds, were directly imitative of Tender as the Night.
Wow.
But she's writing about herself.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I have you. You're mine. This is terrible. What does their chart say? Like, is there, like, you said that there's this secret, like, enemy part? What part of the chart is the secret enemy? I'm curious about this.
The secret, oh yeah. So she has Venus and the moon in 12th house Cancer. So she has to be careful about like who takes care of her. Because that's like the house of isolation, being a hermit. So if he's in there, because he has a moon trine that in the 4th house. I think that you can see it pretty well if you look at their composite. It's definitely where that Pluto shows up between Moon and Mars in Gemini. And the the Neptune conjunct Mars there is like the illusion. So they create this sort of illusion, but it doesn't look safe. It seems unsafe.
Well, I mean, I have it in my head, and again, like, this is wild speculation, because and just a little bit of intuition that, like, that he gaslighted the living crap out of her. I mean, like, I would go absolutely insane if someone was taking my life and packaging it and selling it and being like, you can't use it, your own life, for your art. I mean, right here it says, like, when Zelda, delirious after the birth of her first daughter, said, "I hope she's beautiful and silly, a beautiful little fool," Scott wrote those words as coming from the mouth of his character Daisy in the book The Great Gatsby.
Wow.
I think that would drive me crazy if, like, someone was, like, you know, following me around and, like, basically basing their characters on me and taking, like, whole passages from my diary and putting them in. And that's...
Oh my God, yeah. Like, when someone records your Zoom meeting and then uses what you say in their book?
Yeah. I would go crazy. I know that that's not, you know, there probably were, you know, like, you know, there were mental health issues that were there, but I can't imagine they weren't.
Like, she has Mars, Pluto, Neptune, and Gemini. Like, she does have like a really imbalanced chart, which that's what makes her so interesting. And then when they get together, or he does too. I guess they were born a few years apart, 4 years apart, but they still have really similarities.
Abuse of the muse.
Abuse of the muse.
And I think that, like, so much of what we're talking about is abuse of the muse.
Yeah, like being inspired and then hurting the thing that gives you creativity.
Yeah, and this is crazy.
How does that? What's the function of that? Like, how does that happen?
Well, that's, I think, that's what I'm like. Look, like, what does the chart say? You know what I mean? Like, he was actually pretty freaking evil. Because here, let me read you this quote. And she did cheat on him. There's that. When the couple and good fucking good. You know what I mean? When the couple moved to Paris, Scott was so engrossed in trying to write The Great Gatsby that Zelda ended up meeting and falling in love with French pilot Edouard Jozan. When she asked her husband for a divorce so that she could start a new life with her new love, Scott not only refused, but locked her in the house until she withdrew the request shortly thereafter. Zelda attempted suicide for the first time.
Oh my God. He's like, I own you.
She was like, I want to leave. And he's like, he locked her in the house.
Jeez. But couldn't she escape?
I mean,
she want locked in because she's kind of like needs that Cancer 12th house container of isolation and being kept. Like, I think she actually might have like felt comfort from it. Like, oh, he does want to keep me. Only seeing this from the chart, and she's getting so much attention at that point. Like, she has like, the word is histrionic, but I don't exactly know why that's coming in my head.
Oh, that makes some level of sense, actually.
She's so strongly Leo. So strong, and like just I think she attacks with words. Like, she has swords as her weapon. Like, not swords, but like words.
Oh yeah, words. I mean, like that review where she was like, plagiarism starts at home, and like
yeah, she could like really fuck with people with her stories and how she reads.
Mm-hmm. And I think that she was just this powerhouse, and the fact that, like, you know, like what, and this is where the love stories get really complicated, because like there is the backdrop of, you know, like, I'm sure that like the highs and lows of the relationship, like, you know, there's something to that, but there's just the backdrop of like powerlessness, like over and over and over again. Like, these are really powerful, really amazing women, like put in positions that are downright powerless Because, and these men are very aware of like what they're doing. I mean, he literally locked her in the house. No matter how much he like, she may have like enjoyed sort of the way that he doted on her or obsessed maybe.
Right.
And this, think about it. It seems like an obsession. Like he seems like he's like sicko crazy, like batshit obsessed with her, where he's like taking her diaries and making them into art and like quoting her in his books as like other characters, and then like yelling at her and berating her and forcing her to remove her autobiographical material from her own, work. Like and then he locks her away when she like.
That's Pluto. They have a lot of Pluto synastry with Mars and Neptune. Like, they're just like a little bit insane and dark.
Yeah.
In the way they are to each other, in the way they act. Like they're really intellectual and really high-minded, but the way that things play out physically for them is controlling and also delusional.
Yeah, I think that I can see for sure. I mean, she tried to take up dancing, and I'll read this. Zelda decided to take up dancing, and although she managed to make great advances in her career, Scott's disapproval eventually discouraged her so much that she turned down the offer she received to enroll at the prestigious school, the San Carlo Opera Ballet Company in Naples. So. And then finally in 1930, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in France where she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And there's a lot of question about that. Not everybody kind of agrees that she should have been diagnosed that way.
Yeah, just a reason to lock her up or let her rest.
I think that like she was being tortured. I really think that this is like an abuse situation where she's being tortured. And I think that like women in like domestic violence situations, and like if he's locking her in a house, that's like hands down a domestic violence situation. And we talked a little bit about domestic violence with MLK and Coretta Scott King. And I don't know that, I'm referring more to like, it sounded like verbal abuse, but, and that's domestic violence to me, also. But there's this notion of like when you're in a domestic violence situation, like that is torture. You're actually like a prisoner in your home. There's no two ways about it. Like when somebody is like capable of like going against your will to leave, and like holding you captive so that they can continue to extort.
I lose my mind. That's true. I'm feeling it right now. I'm feeling the panic, the absolute total panic. Yeah. And losing my mind. Like I can't leave, so I'm gonna leave my body. I'm gonna dissociate and just lose my mind.
It's torture. I mean, like it's almost like the more profoundly strong and like vibrant like a woman, like the harder the post-marriage fall. In all of these stories.
Yikes.
So.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, and she had a bad death. She was locked in a room awaiting electroshock therapy when it caught on fire.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that is horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm trying to find where.
I think it's like so morbid to see in a chart like how one dies, or I don't think you can see that.
Is there anything there that would indicate like that kind of an end?
I've never looked into that sort of thing. That information doesn't pop out at me. Like that's the unknowable.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be able to see that. Not me. Not my ability.
Oh man, he was so mean to her. Like this is right here. It said, there are these quotes that show like a serious problem. And so this relationship, like, let me see. Yeah, let me just see if I can find this quote. He wasn't so great to his daughter either. Right here it says, Scott wrote weekly to her at college. Rather than send her $50 in allowance once a month, he insisted on sending her a check for $13.85 every week, probably as a vehicle for his missives. He told her which courses to take, what extracurricular activities were worthwhile, whom to date, her duties toward Zelda, what to read, how to wear her hair. He critiqued her behavior, her academic performance, and her choice of roommates. Clearly, he loved her, Scotty, very much, and his self-confessed desire to preach now had an outlet. So, like, he was heinously controlling.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's how he treated his daughter. He couldn't send her $50 a month because he had to make sure that she was spending $13.85 every week. Imagine if your dad told you how to wear your hair.
I cannot imagine.
I would die. So I think that, like, you know, when we think about the pressure cooker situation of the abuse that was going on in terms of, like, not only his obsession that was, like, abuse of the muse, and locking her, like literally holding her like physically captive, like the level of control he's exerting over their daughter, you know, this is
knowing what happened to her own mother, yet like,
yeah,
you know, oh my God.
And it really casts a shadow on like on the whole story of like her mental health. Like this really casts a shadow on it because, you know, what was she dealing with? Like literally this man was like obsessed with her, like taking from her, controlling her. Like who wouldn't not lose their mind in that situation? Why is the story like she suffered all these things, you know, and we don't understand, instead of like we understand that he drove her absolutely crazy?
That is the question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm interested in their daughter's chart.
Yeah.
It's like all these children that they're producing through these tumultuous, incredible relationships and lives. Like there's an effect. Like maybe like that ends up being the legacy is in the child.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm just thinking about the horror of this because it's suddenly occurring to me that like they're buried in a tomb together.
Oh no.
Yeah. I wonder how much like she wanted to be there. I mean, it says here that, you know, in this article that her granddaughter, I believe as my mother, that Scott and Zelda stayed in love until the day they died. Perhaps it became an impossible and impractical love, part nostalgia and part hope. Perhaps it was a longing for a reunion of all the best qualities in each other that they had once celebrated and the happy times they had shared. But it was a bond that united them forever. I still find it like kind of creepy that's kind of where we're sat with this. Even
right, but of course they're reunited in death because they have so much strong Pluto in their synastry composite, and their daughter ended up being a Scorpio, Sun and Mercury in Scorpio, the grand water trine, Uranus on the rising, and this is good birth data. So like that does end up being where a lot of the work ends up showing up. Is in the next generation.
Now I'm curious. Yeah, so there is something there, but you know, in terms of like recasting the way that this actually looks, I think, you know, Scott Fitzgerald sounds a little bit like a criminal. You know, he kind of sounds a little bit like criminal behavior toward her. You know, like there's this quote here. She was Zelda was Scott's de facto collaborator, and that he appropriated her personal experience in his work. Such charges were given additional weight by the frequent addition of his name to her bylines on nearly 24 stories and articles she produced between 1922 and 1934. In fact, Scott's agent or editors added his name in several instances without his knowledge because the joint byline increased the price that these works received from leading magazines.
Yeah.
Like
that's what she had to do? Or the agents did it?
The agents just did it. The agent just like added his name to her work.
So then they had to split profits. They weren't just for her?
I don't know what the profit sharing was because they were married. I mean, I know that he was so bad with money as to be like, it like, you know, he was always borrowing money and always like borrowing money to write. So I don't.
He spent it on things.
Yeah, alcohol and other kind of stuff. Let's see.
And he had affairs. Did he have mistresses like hookers and things?
There is a mistress, although I'm not really sure where it is in my notes at this time.
She had a lover though that he would refuse to let her.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Yeah, no, she had a lover, and he wouldn't even like let her. He locked her in that when she was like, I want a divorce. I want to go be with this man that I fell in love with. He was like, no, you're not. I'm locking you in the house until you rescind that.
Oh, he had a lover, Sheila Graham.
Of course he did. Yeah, I thought that was in there somewhere.
They shared a home and were constant companions while he's still married to his wife Zelda, who is institutionalized in an asylum.
Oh,
maybe he
man.
put her there so he could have the affair.
I mean,
or like a wife.
Did he institutionalize her? It says here, in 1930, stress resulting from her frustrated attempts to become a professional ballerina led to the first of what would be many psychological breakdowns. Although Zelda was treated for schizophrenia, mental health experts later would contest both the diagnosis and recovery regime prescribed by her main physician. So, like, was she having psychological breakdowns because of the stress of being a ballerina, or was she having psychological breakdowns because of the stress of being, like, locked up, having her life stolen from her, everything that she created, her abuser's name was on it?
Right, and he thought she was so interesting and giving her all this attention and, like, love bombing, basically. And then his mistress was a gossip columnist who also wrote about interesting people's interesting lives, right? Like, he's probably stealing her work, too. Like, he needed, he was so much in his air signs that he needed to feed those ideas. And he used women to feed that.
Yeah. So, like, these are men that and him very specifically, like, he was like a vampire siphoning her life force.
Yeah.
This is why, like, when I started doing this research, I was like, wait a minute, there's like, these are some twisted love stories. And I do think that if we were to go person by person, house by house, and look at love stories, like, they are never a snapshot. They're always like serpentine, like power dynamics and, individual growth spans and like, and every other thing. And I think it was, there's a quote, let me see if I can pull it up because it's so good. My sister told me about this. It's bell hooks, and it's something along the lines, it was like, it was a definition of love that was something along the lines of, let's see if I can get it on before bell hooks. Love is, okay. Yeah. In her book, All About Love, Bell Hooks defines love as the will to extend one's self to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth.
Aww.
She uses the word spiritual to represent the soul or life force of a person and not as a reference to religion. So that's love. It's like, it's not even really a destination. It's just like extending yourself to nurture your, like, another's spiritual growth. And this is the opposite. These are saboteurs on these women's spiritual growth.
They're killing the spirits of these. They kill each other's spirits somehow. Like,
it's actually the opposite.
Like that. Yeah.
It's the opposite of love.
Yeah.
Every single love story we're talking about here is the opposite of love. If love is about fostering someone, helping foster someone's spiritual development, and these were actually, in one way or another, in terms of thwarting the progress, like saboteurs of their spiritual development, it's quite literally the opposite of love. Evil.
Do you want to do Eleanor Roosevelt?
Yes. Let's take.
These are looking charts here. Beautiful.
Let's go over to them. They're a little softer in there, like, let me see if I can. Here we go. So they both were in love with other people. It was kind of like a political marriage.
Interesting.
Like, she was in love with Lorena Hickok. Yeah. Lorena Hickok, who was a reporter or journalist. So Eleanor was in love with this journalist, and he was in love with a Lucy. And I'm going to look for my notes on that.
His chart is kind of like the chart of a ethical non-monogamy guy, because he has a lot of strong Aquarius, Venus conjunct Sun, and Aquarius and Mercury, and he has Uranus conjunct his rising. So that's all kind of like weird ways of loving. And, but he needed comfort. He had moon and Cancer. Like, he needed women.
Yeah.
And she has the best chart. She's so exciting and awesome. Venus conjunct Jupiter. She like was such a lover. She probably overdid it. So she had the same moon sign as him. So they having the same moon and Cancer, and hers in the 8th house, like with a lot in Libra. Mars and Scorpio in the 12th house. She's probably like very sexual.
And isn't that like she probably like she was, because I have all of these excerpts from Eleanor Roosevelt's love letters with Lorena Hickok, and stuff gets a little steamy for sure. I mean, they had a vibrant love affair for many years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Right?
She's like a butch hero.
Yeah, she had a beautiful relationship. And he actually sort of did too. I mean, you know, some of the friction, you know, when she found out that he was having an affair, she went to him and they talked about it, and then she said, you know, let's get a divorce. Like, obviously, you know, if you're in love with somebody else, let's get a divorce. And so he wanted a divorce and she wanted a divorce, and they went to his mother, who, you know, was giving them a lot of money, and said, we want to get a divorce. And the mom was like, if you do it, I'm cutting you off. If you get a divorce, you're cut off. And his political advisors were like, if you get a divorce, your political career is like toast. So you can't get a divorce. And then he goes to Lucy and tells Lucy that the reason that they can't have a divorce is because Eleanor won't step aside. Meanwhile, it's his mom.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Threw him on the bus.
So, like, she responded, I think, by saying, like, okay, then we're married, but we're not sharing a bed anymore. Like, we're not gonna do anything like that. And so that was kind of like the terms, but they were both in like really intense relationships with other people. What are the charts of the other people look like in terms of the synastry of the love?
Oh, I didn't save that. I don't know. I should have saved that.
No,
we'll have to do for another episode.
Yeah, well, I think we're going over we're at an hour and 45 minutes. Well, we're good.
Let's do the lovers start that off on the next episode, and then
let's do it.
Sense, because they were intensely together.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, this was like a political marriage where both people in the marriage were so in love with other people. And so when we come back, we'll look at them, and I guess we can keep doing this. I mean, like, we got like the names that we picked were like super arbitrary. I think we were just like on the phone. We're like, let's do a podcast. Let's pick these names. So these were like arbitrary names, and the stories that go along with, you know, when I went to look at the background, they were all like really horrible, like terrifyingly, like, you know, with the exception of FDR and Eleanor, who like they were pretty good about, you know, recognizing. I mean, he was a jerk for saying that Eleanor was the reason why they couldn't get a divorce when she was very, you know, like I don't want to say eager to offer him one, but she certainly did. But it's the other relationships where it's just like almost like a horror movie, you know. And I wonder, you know, with this research, if we're going to find like great, you know, accomplished people in, you know, in marriages that aren't totally abusive. Like I just, it's going to be an interesting foray.
Yeah, they didn't abuse each other.
Yeah, who didn't abuse each other? Was that even a possibility in a patriarchy where one person owned the other person like property? Like, is there any love when somebody is pretty much property?
That's a good question. Because how can you love someone spiritually when you're asking them to serve you? Unless that is a spiritual thing. If that's written in a book, like a Bible, that serving your husband is spiritual, then you're going to fall for it.
Well, yeah. Well, the patriarchy, you know, makes a lot of use of organized religion in that way. I mean, the biggest, and that's an episode in and of itself. Like, you know, organized religion and subjugating women go hand in hand, with the exception of. I'm just trying to give something. Like, are there any major organized religions that aren't patriarchal?
No.
Yeah. So, like, organized religion is a system of oppression for women. Like, point blank.
Yeah.
So no wonder our, like, witch wound is so damn deep.
The witch wound, because that's pre-organized religion, right? That's going back to, like, pagan, pre-Christian, pre-Abrahamic.
Well, I think the witch wound is any time like you like like the witch wound is like whenever you are shamed and like abused for any level of difference that is like non-compliant to the established patriarchal like standards. I mean, it goes back so far in so many ways. And I saw a TikTok the other day that like there was a study done on the DNA of magical people, and they sort of like were able to look. I have to find it because it's like good enough that I would like link it below. I'll link it below. But it was like something about how they can trace back like the decline in psychic ability trace in genes to like the Roman Empire. And it's like analogous to like nowadays there are elephants that are being born without tusks to ensure their survival against poachers. And so I really do think like with women and spirituality, you know, we have all of this spiritual giftedness in all of these different ways, but it's almost been there was an attempt to breed it out.
Right, by killing as many as you could find.
And like a lot of the witch trials were mostly just like insane fever dreams of psychotic men who like, you know, just all these witch trials were like hysterical, like horrendous nightmares that basically had nothing to do with like witchcraft or wise women or, you know, to the extent that like sometimes it looks like it just related to menopause. But so the witch trials that we like know of like are just about like putting on a show of power of, you know, that we can kill women in this horrible way. But I think the witch wound goes all the way back to women not even having a vehicle of spiritual like expression. So like the temples, you know, at least there were these temples that, you know, you could have your high priestesses. There was some way in which women could interact with goddesses and interact with their spirituality. You know, there was at least some avenue, but then you add, you know, then you move forward to like Christendom and they're wiped off the face of the map when it comes to just spiritual expression.
Right, because they can't express their gifts in that institution.
They can't. So this is like, it's a spiritual, like we're talking about like almost like a spiritual problem here in terms of siphoning life force, stealing legacies, and like silencing women along the lines of, you know, any kind of expression that would put them at the front of the room in any kind of way.
A spiritual problem.
It's a spiritual problem. It really is a spiritual problem.
More serious than equality. It's actually existential.
Well, when you consider the level of like weaponizing love, the most powerful binding agent, and weaponizing it as like a mechanism of capture and control.
Yeah.
Which is like ugly. That's sort of why, yeah. When I look at all of the like spiritual, like, you know, tarot readers and TikTok, you know, people who are like, you know, out there doing this stuff, it's kind of imperfect overall, but ultimately like women have been silenced spiritually for so long that it almost doesn't matter like how spiritual wisdom comes out of their mouth at this point. It's just that it's expressing in any way is like, this is new. Yeah, it's beautiful.
It seems like a wave. It's all happening. Where it was like so hidden before and almost hard to find. You just like some like palmistry neon sign on some street corner was all we saw representing the magical arts or the psychic abilities of someone. We can all speak freely to each other, that we all have an ability to access this. It changes everything. It allows us to have intuition instead of being controlled by someone who tells us what to do.
Or like what is real and what's not real. Like total reality testing being thrown completely. And
exactly. Reality testing, discernment to its utmost degree.
It's crazy. And so, you know, when we're just the work that we're doing right now in terms of like looking at these charts and sort of recasting these stories, I think is this notion of like bringing spirituality into it and saying like, hey, like, you know, look at the powerhouse that this one was or the powerhouse that one was, and like thwart it over and over and over again as like almost like written in the stars, which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Well, it's like the warning story for all our daughters and granddaughters. Like, look what happened here's a story for you. Think about that.
Yeah.
At what cost do you want to be in the psyop of marriage? Like, are you going to lose your life's work and what it could be? You know, are you going to offer that over to someone else who's then going to mistreat you and drive you insane, or like isolate you, or
give you like a list of mean rules that you have to follow? Like, imagine like someone who's a total son of a bitch. He cheated on you. You're in like this, you're stuck in a house with them, and then they give you have to cook their freaking, like, cook a meal for this person. You don't even want to know what I would put in that meal. Oh my God. If I had to cook a meal for someone that was that cruel to me, who wrote me a list that's like, I shall have my 3 meals a day in my room. Oh, you're going to get your 3 meals a day in your room, and I'm going to take a shit in the fucking soup pot. But, and maybe that's how.
Like, if at that point you're like pleading for some love, like you get thrown a splinter, a morsel of love if the meal is good, and that forces you to comply. Like, at what point are you giving compliance in order to feel human?
Well, it didn't last very long. And, and I think that, back to this notion of like, what price are you willing to pay for the story of a romantic, a romantic relationship?
And the story, exactly. Like, doing what expectations are that you are supposed to be married and you're supposed to stay with your husband and have a family. Like Eleanor and Franklin.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a good place to leave it, is this notion that like when we think about love, we are thinking about a story that isn't love and that is actually a fiction, because, love as like marriage with the end game and like a life of like, doting partnership. Sure, it probably occasionally happens, but when there is an imbalance of property, when there is an imbalance of power and a woman is property, then there's no such thing as the love story. In the same way that, like, I think it was, is it Thomas Jefferson who had a slave that he loved? Is that?
Yeah.
Like, was that a love story? No, she was a slave. It couldn't possibly be. If you were owned by someone, there's no way that would be, classified as like actually love. These stories are complex, and like love is a binding agent, and love as something that had a presence in a relationship that can be alongside abuse. Like, love can exist alongside abuse. It's horrible. It's like, it's a horrible, contortion, but it absolutely can. And so like when we think about the love stories that we live for in one way or another, or the love stories that we're, given to live for, like when we recast these things and we look at the story versus the reality of what, unbalanced partnership can be, and almost like the peril that, like cautionary tale, like the cautionary tale of like, you can have that love affair and all the highs and lows that go along with it, but make sure that that this story doesn't end at happily ever after. This story nowadays can end, I think, possibly a happily ever after, but their stories certainly didn't end at happily ever after. Their stories ended at having their legacies stolen, having their life force siphoned, having their creative abilities, basically go unrecognized and unknown, while a man stood there and took all of the credit.
Damn, that's the story we need to know that, like, you meet a person and you form a contract, you have a marriage, and then there's going to be crisis still. There's going to be disappointment, and there's going to be you need the ability to leave freely. Yeah.
I don't know. Is marriage a psyop? I think we're going to leave it at that question. And then when we come back, we'll go back to Eleanor and Roosevelt and FDR. And we're also I'm going to dig up some new couples to like look at. And, I'm going to try to avoid confirmation bias by like just picking people randomly. But this is definitely something to think about in terms of the love story that we know versus the love story that we have, that women have lived through.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's kind of a perfect place to end. And this was a fun first podcast. I'm a little, I was a little wobbly, kind of getting into this. But this is definitely, I'm really excited about going forward and what we're going to create with this. And every other Sunday, right?
Every other Sunday, yeah, we'll have a new podcast. Yep. New Virginity podcast. number 2 coming up.
Coming up next, we're going to start back with Eleanor and Franklin Del Roosevelt. So let's leave it there, and also their lovers. Let's leave it there, and this is exciting. We'll see you guys again soon.